Howdy everyone, you're listening to Blue Jeans and Boots, where genetics grad students talk about how to navigate a Ph.D. program while trying to stay sane. We also often invite faculty from our interdisciplinary program here at Texas A&M to pick their brains about their research, what it's like being a principal investigator, and their journey to becoming a professor here at A&M. In this episode, we'll be talking to Dr. Jessica Light, a professor and curator of mammals in the Ecology and Conservation Biology department at Texas A&M University. She received her BS in biology and resource ecology and management at the University of Michigan and her Ph.D. in zoology at Louisiana State University. Her lab uses molecular and morphological data to study the evolution of distantly related taxa, such as between mammals and their parasites. My name is Emmarie, and I'll be one of your hosts today.
My name is Sarah, and I'll be your other host.
So, Dr. Light, first things first, can you tell us a little bit about your current research and what your lab studies?
Sure, but first, Emmarie, Sarah, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Current research, it's a little much right now. I have a couple of main focuses, or foci, might be the better way to say that. For one project, which is one I'm hoping to continue working on for a long time, I'm looking at a widespread rodent called Paramiscus maniculatus, the North American deer mouse. We have it here in Texas, but it is also distributed all the way from northwestern Canada. I'm visualizing it in my head, south into Mexico, and it goes as far east as southeastern U.S. And we're trying to get a better handle on cryptic species that are within the complex, both genetically as well as morphologically. And we've been working on the project for about 3 years now, 4 years or so. So it's really just getting started, and I think it can lead to lots of questions later about potential hybridization, other interactions that these cryptic species, which may not be so cryptic if we're able to figure that out, but the interactions that they may be having together. So that's one project.
I was going to say, so for our listeners who may not know what a cryptic species is, could you define
Yes, thank you. Cryptic species are those that look pretty much the same, but they're actually different. So these mice that I'm talking about are like those typical little brown mice with like whiter bellies and sometimes bicolored tails where it's dark on top and light on the bottom. They all kind of look the same to us. But we're trying to use some novel morphological investigation to maybe look at not just, say, skulls, which is what most mammalogists do, but also other parts of their bodies to see if there might be some shape or size differences that can help us come up with quantitative ways to tell these different species apart, even if you just look at them in hand, they pretty much look the same or being cryptic. Yeah, cool. Thanks. Other projects. Another big one that was recently funded in my lab is we're looking at sucking lice that are found on mammals. These sucking lice are the same that we have, like our head lice and pubic lice, but they're actually distributed. The lice themselves are found across all different placental mammals, that mammal group that we belong to, and pretty much everything except for marsupials and monotremes like platypus and echidnas belong to. We're looking at these lice to try to get a better hold of how they're related. There's about 500 to 600 species across, I think it's 15 families. No one really knows how these different louse groups are related. I was part of some preliminary work when I was a postdoc, but no one's picked it back up. So yay, me and my collaborators were doing that. But we're also trying to get at questions of selection and how does a sucking louse become a parasite of a particular mammal? We're looking to see if perhaps there's some genomic adaptations going on because sucking lice feed on blood. So is there something about the blood components that they might be cueing in on that we could potentially address using molecular methods? Or perhaps there's something morphologically going on where we could look at, say, their claws and like how wide of a hair can fit or diameter hair could fit in those claws. Or perhaps there's some other things, again, that we can't see as people. So we're hoping to use some quantitative methods as well to look at the morphology of these lice. We're just getting started with this. Some of the lice are found on like really weird things that are hard to get, like aardvarks and vicuñas and camels and zebras. And these are the things that we're trying to get a hold of through collaborations and generous donors and things like that. But yeah, that's a second big project that's just gotten started in my lab.
Very cool. So I guess, okay, that raises the questions. Aardvarks seem like they're relatively not that hairy. So they're hairy?
Yeah, if you go with the definition of mammals, there's hair on them somewhere.
That's true.
I've never seen an aardvark close up.
Okay.
So the closest I can get to are like videos that I've seen. So they have sparse hair on them.
Yeah.
And truly the hair for the lice anyway is just something to hang on to.
Okay.
When they feed, oh golly, I'm forgetting my morphology here, but like they basically can't just stay attached by feeding. If they have a proboscis or straw-like structure, that's not going to keep them attached very long. But very few lice actually have that. So they're hanging on to the hairs and usually have like little teeth or grooves, and they're cutting into the skin and then getting the blood that way that they then ingest through various means.
So for the sucking lice, do they have the ability to transmit any diseases beyond just being like a nuisance for the animal?
They do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Has it been well studied in wildlife? Not so much, but there have been studies on human lice and their ability to potentially transmit disease. I'm not fully up to date on that literature, but as blood feeders, I think they fall into a category of any potential vector of disease.
Ooh. Freaky
indeed. Yeah, I definitely give people nightmares when I start talking about like the louse aspect of my research, which I enjoy, but sorry, everybody else.
Okay, that also raises another question for me that I wanted to ask is, did you start out as a mammologist that then got interested in parasites or lice?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay. Let me think for a second. I think it was parasitologist first.
Really?
Yeah. So when I was an undergrad, as you stated earlier, I was an undergrad at the University of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And I was pre-med first, like I'm sure many people are. And then I was taking my intro classes and totally bombing them. So I was like, this is not working for me at all. I was crying. I was in tears. I'm like, I can't be a doctor. What am I going to do? And I had this wonderful opportunity to take courses at a field station. Now, when I was at that field station, I took a general ecology course and I took a mammalogy course. So you think that's what would have done it. But I would take lunch with the students that were taking parasitology, and I was absolutely enamored. I was like, this is disgusting. I need to do this. This is amazing. So I did love the mammals, and I definitely started enjoying them quite a bit in taking that class. And I went on to take another like on-campus class later. But my research start was on parasites. And it was through being at this biological station that got it all started for me.
Cool. So prior to starting recording the episode, you had actually mentioned a biological station that you're planning on doing some work at this summer. Is it the same station?
It is the same one. Yeah, I think maybe we can circle back to imposter syndrome later, but I got a lot of that going on, and the instructor for the field mammalogy course retired pre-pandemic, or at least he was planning on it. And they had lined up who they were going to have teach the class, but something happened. I don't know what. And anyway, it trickled down. They end up contacting me and they're like, would you be interested? And I jumped at the opportunity. The field course is ecology. So like one of my big things that I need to do this summer is like bone up on basic statistics and kind of have some ideas of things that we're going to do with these students, because I can't do, molecular work with them. I won't have enough time to do a lot of morphological work. We need to work with living data sets that already exist and kind of focus on that and apply some relatively simple statistical types of analyses to those data. But yeah, I get to circle back around to what got me started as an undergrad, and now I get to teach up there and I get to tell the same story to those students too, and how impactful that experience was for me.
That's really awesome.
I think so too. Yeah.
Speaking of living data sets, I don't know if you're still working on it. I'd seen on your lab that you were a part of digitizing parasites.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious about what exactly that entails.
So what we were trying to do is, this falls into like my other hat as a curator of a natural history collection, and I curate our mammal collection here on campus, which is actually off campus though. It's down the road from here, but I curate a mammal collection. And for vertebrate organisms, over the years, those curators have been pretty good about, we need to get our data available and online so that people know that we have these specimens in our collections, and hopefully bring them in to do research on them. For invertebrates, that has lagged behind, especially for parasites. So I was part of this, it's called a TCN, a thematic collections network. It was 20 plus institutions. It was a $4 to $5 million total grant from the National Science Foundation to try to digitize and make electronic and available invertebrate, specifically terrestrial parasite specimen data available to the public. So we were working on things that you would find terrestrially, like mosquitoes, and things that weren't necessarily insects, like ticks, but lice fell into that group, flies, parasitic flies, beyond mosquitoes, all these things we were trying to get their data available and online and through databases that were searchable by the public and other researchers so that they could ask questions of those data.
That is so cool.
Yeah, the project wrapped up, but I just got a question about it the other day. And it's still something that we're still working on here because we digitized and made electronic data that we had here, which was specifically ectoparasites from small mammals and birds that we were collecting in the field, and working on transferring that over to our insect collection that we have on campus and helping to get those data mobilized through the insect collection while they're simultaneously linked back to our vertebrate collections too. It's quite complicated, but fun if you like to organize stuff.
I do. I'm a fan of organizing. That sounds like a dream.
It's luckily I had many people working on it who also love to organize. So I'm so thankful for them and their involvement because they help keep us on track.
So what are some of the other duties that are associated with being a curator of a collection?
It's like I have to do everything. So the main duty is to preserve and maintain those collections, in my opinion. Like, that's the most important thing. These collections, digitized or not, need to be available for any potential researcher to use in the future. There's some discussion out there of like, oh, the data are digitized. If you're taking images of the specimens, why do you need to still keep them? And that's because there could be a question that somebody wants to ask in 10, 15 years using some novel methodology that we haven't even thought about. And we need to keep those specimens available for that. The way that we're studying the specimens now or in the past is not the only way that you can study these specimens. So it's important to preserve them while simultaneously making their data available to allow researchers to ask those future questions. So first and foremost, preserve, maintain those collections. So I have to oversee things like bug checks and making sure that we're not getting insects infesting our collections and eating things and destroying them. I want to work to grow those collections, which involves things like permitting and all that other fun stuff when you work with vertebrates in the field. Hosting visitors, responding to loan requests to use those specimens. So we definitely want that to happen. Overseeing interns that might be working to make sure that the collections are in good shape and organized, and countless other things. There are many different things as part of being a curator. It's fun. It's one of the most fun parts of my job because I wish I could just spend all day out there sometimes and go home stinking like mothballs and everything else. But it's one of many jobs that I have too.
For sure. I was going to say, it's actually kind of interesting that you say that because most natural history collections are older than the field of genetics itself. Yeah. And so who would have thought that 60, 70 years later after initially collecting those specimens that we would be trying to take molecular data from them.
There's no way Darwin was we're going to do genetic work later. I mean, I'm going to get with my buddy Mendel, who I've never met before, and I'm going to I know that we can use this specimen. There's no way. Yeah. Just like there's no way that I can think in 50 years how these specimens could be used.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. How old is the collections here at A&M?
They were founded in the 1930s. Okay. Through what was then our Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences. Mm-hmm. And I believe it was the chair of the department or a faculty member in collaboration with other folks that started collecting and founding the collection in the mid-1930s. Okay. Some of the specimens are older than that because some of these folks were collecting prior to that and kind of bringing their personal collections in.
What would you say is the coolest specimen?
Oh, man, this to me is the hardest question ever. It's so hard. So some of the favorites that I love to show off are fishing bats from Central and South America because they are bats that don't eat insects, but they eat fish. So they use echolocation to perceive movements of ripples at the surface of the water. And then when they detect it, they fly over the water really closely and they drag their hind feet over. And they have big, long toes and claws, and they scoop up the fish. They toss them into their uropatagium or their tail membrane, and then I'm not exactly sure if they eat on the wing while they're flying or if they go and kind of try to roost someplace and then eat the fish. But they're really pretty and reddish bats with stripes down their backs and these huge, huge hind legs. So I like showing those off along with the fruit bats because we don't have them here and they're ginormous. So we open up a case and show them like the 2 fruit bats taking up a whole drawer and they're like, oh my gosh. So it's fun to get those reactions. I study mostly rodents, and it's never really fun to be like, want to see a rat? And most people are not excited about that. And also a lot of them aren't necessarily super like interesting looking. However, here in Texas, we have things like kangaroo rats. And I think those are fun to show because they look like little mini kangaroos with big hind feet. It's hard to see when they're in specimen form, but you can get appreciation of it. They also have interesting skulls that I like to show off as well.
What's your favorite mammal? Or favorite order?
Jeez. Okay. That's another one. I was seriously just last week, people were asking me the same question and I should have thought and prepared. Like I need an answer versus I like them all. I suppose the ones that interest me, and this is an answer I gave last week, are those ones that have unique adaptations for the environments that they're living in. I think it's really cool to just look at them and appreciate them. So I can go to all the bats that way. I think the bats are really cool. You can look at even just their faces and see morphological adaptations for them perceiving the environment, which I think is really neat. The cetaceans are also really neat that way as well. We don't have a lot of them, but we surprisingly still have a good number of smaller cetaceans. I don't spend a lot of time looking at them because we just have their skulls for the most part. But yeah, I think my favorite groups, when it comes down to it, ends up being like everything, because just about everything has an adaptation for how it lives and survives. So having a chance to look at those and be like, oh, this one must be doing this to survive, and being able to try to figure out what that story is just by looking at the specimen and not necessarily reading about it. And be like, oh, I can figure it out by looking at its teeth. I think that's kind of neat stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm jealous.
You can come over and play anytime. Just let me know. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I will take you up on that.
One of the other responsibilities as being a curator is having to actually go out and collect specimens. Could you kind of walk us through what fieldwork or maybe specimen collection would look like?
Sure. Well, the first thing is to have a plan, right? Versus just going out and be like, I'm going to catch everything here. So once you have your plan, then there's permitting. And permitting is on multiple fronts, especially as part of an academic institution. I have to have approval through the institution here, through IACUC. What does IACUC stand for? I don't know, but my thing is called an AUP, an Animal Use Protocol. But IACUC is the board that's going to make sure that you're responsibly working with animals. So they're making sure that my methodology is sound and won't unnecessarily harm organisms that I work with. So I get permits and permission from the university, but I also have to get permission from the state or country where I'll be collecting. So I'm mostly just focused on state stuff right now with the work that I do. Once all that's in hand, then you plan, like, where are you going? What are you doing? What organisms are you trying to work on? So I work with primarily nocturnal small rodents and other small mammals like shrews that would be active at night. So you want to set the appropriate traps for them and make sure you have them and then the bait. But I also work with fossorial mammals like pocket gophers. So that's a different type of trapping, and you have to make sure you have all that. The nocturnal small mammals are kind of nice because I like to use live traps for them. So if I'm, say, targeting Peromyscus, but I end up catching a bunch of other things that are not Peromyscus, those deer mice that I mentioned earlier, I can let them go. The pocket gophers, the traps that we use there, those are going to take the animal. They're meant to be instantaneous traps that will cause death upon impact. So we try to set those really carefully so that the animal's not in any pain or anything like that. And then we get kind of the bare minimum that we need for whatever question that we have. So we don't keep trying to take and take and take. And that's part of what the permitting process also makes sure that we're not overtaking from any particular area. Assuming that these specimens are going to go back to a natural history collection, we will euthanize them if necessary, especially for those ones that are live captured, and we'll do that in a humanely approved way through the university and the state. And then we'll process them so that they can be added into the collection. So in our case, that involves a process of specimen preparation of skinning, and keeping the skin, and then the skeletal components, as well as taking tissues for genetic work.
For the pocket gophers, they're pretty notorious to be difficult to capture. Is part of the reason why those traps I guess, is it necessary because of like the pocket gophers like getting loose, or like you're trying to make sure that the amount of effort that you put toward capturing like captures? I don't know if that question makes sense.
Let's see if we can talk through it.
Yeah, okay, let's do it.
Yeah, so pocket gophers are fossorial and they live underground.
Yes.
So that, number one, makes them hard to catch. So you have to dig into their burrow system, and then you're kind of guessing where to put the trap. So there's you're on the ground, you're dirty. There's almost always fire ants like coexisting with the pocket gopher. So it's so you're digging in and you're trying to get to a point where you can feel like with a flag or some other apparatus that the burrow continues, that there's not a stop. Pocket gopher burrows sometimes just dead end. And if you set a trap there, you're not going to catch anything, right? The traps that they then use, there are live traps, which I think are notoriously difficult. Yes. I have never successfully caught a pocket gopher with a live trap, but I also haven't tried very hard. Yeah. At least with ones that we have here in Texas. Okay. I've used live traps farther south in Mexico. Those are like leg hold traps, but without like the spiky things that you think of when you think of leg holds. They're just padded. So they're meant to grab the animal on the arm, and then you pull it out from there for the forearm. Okay. But the traps that we use here, they're kill traps. You need to make sure to set them appropriately because you want them to kill upon impact. And if they don't, another aspect that might make pocket gopher trapping a little bit more difficult is that you need to continually check and make sure that if you have an animal that you get it out of there pretty quickly. Yeah. So every 30 minutes or so, we're checking. And we're doing this during the day in Texas. It's nice and hot. So it's quite a workout. You try to get started early and be done by noon so that you don't have to be out in the heat too long.
For sure.
Do you stick around to just the College Station area, or do you collect from all over Texas?
So another project that we're working on is looking at this one genus of pocket gopher that we do have all across the state, but it's also distributed farther north and south and east. And we would like to look at the lice on the pocket gophers to see if there has been a co-evolutionary history between the pocket gophers and the lice. These guys are a model system. My Ph.D. advisor studied them. I studied them as part of my dissertation as well, but no one's really looked at this one genus very carefully. So to answer your question, nope, not just around here, but all throughout Texas, we are using museum collections to help us instead of us doing all the field work, because many people trap pocket gophers. And we can use these already obtained specimens to get parasites from the skins and then take the specimens back to the lab for future work.
Okay. Well, that makes things a little bit easier, the collaboration.
Collaboration's great. I highly recommend it.
You had mentioned imposter syndrome earlier in the episode. I guess how do you deal with it? As a grad student currently, I feel like it's really, really difficult a lot of the times to be like, I feel like I really am interested in my research and I'm trying to do a good job, but it never feels like I'm necessarily doing enough. Yeah, I don't know.
When I was in grad school, I went without getting a master's degree, and I went straight to a Ph.D. from undergrad. And when I looked at my cohort of other graduate students in the program, I felt like such a blubbering idiot around them. Like I just didn't feel like I had the know-how to be able to do what I was doing. And it took me a little while, and then I finally just stopped comparing myself to them. But I had to get to that point where it's like, okay, I'm spending too much time and energy comparing myself to what I don't know based on my comparison with this person. Let's spend my energy instead doing the work and not comparing anymore. But it did take a point for me to get there. And I think that's probably the same for most folks. You can't just tell your brain stop. Sometimes you need to get to a point where you see okay, this is no longer conducive. This isn't a good use of my time. So what else can I be doing? Yeah. I still have it in many ways. You're never going to be as good as you thought you could be or where you want to be. But I also am trying to balance that with well, I don't need to be that good. I'm comfortable being mediocre. I'm totally fine with that. as long as I'm doing a good job, you know, and I'm doing the best that I can with the abilities that I have and the collaborations that I have. So I would say at least now, there's certainly some things that I feel like I'm still lagging behind on, like, oh, my personal skills could be way better, especially on an administrative level. But I'm not going to worry about that because I'm not doing any of that work right now.
Yeah.
So I can focus on the other stuff instead. I can focus on improving the things that I'm already decent at without worrying too much, well, like, oh, this person does it so much better than me, and that makes me bad. But more so now, like, oh, they do it so much better than me. What are they doing? And can I do something similar? So taking that, I guess, differential of abilities that I perceive and trying to use it in my favor.
I think that's a really good point to make, though, because especially with a program like ours that's so interdisciplinary, everyone's got such a different journey and no one reaches the same milestones at the same point.
No way.
And so you can't look at other people and compare yourself to them because they're doing something totally different from what you're doing.
Yep. And even if it seems like, well, they're doing, you know, this type of molecular work in the lab, my molecular work should just be similar, except that it's not, right? Mm-hmm. If it's a different organism, if it's a different marker that you're working on, a different methodology, like every single one of those has roadblocks, especially if you're not in like a model system, or if you are in a model system, but you're trying to do something new. Like there's always going to be something that goes wrong, like almost always, at least once.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like a lot of the times people don't necessarily recognize that like their research is literally on the like front and like frontier of that science, and like you're trying to discover new things. That's what a PhD is really for. And so it's not necessarily going to be the easiest journey, but it can be a lot.
Yeah, I guess the struggle is don't let the challenge get you down, right?
Yeah.
But kind of like live in that moment and that challenge and be like, this is actually fun, as frustrating as it is of trying to solve this problem.
Yeah. I guess burnout is another common issue that grad students and PIs deal with. Mm-hmm. What do you do to take care of yourself? And when you have experienced burnout, do you have any advice on getting out of it?
You got to take a break. You got to take a break. And that's easier said than done depending on your relationship with your advisor, right? Or whomever you're working with for the research that you're doing at that time. Sometimes you got to keep going with certain things, right? If you're a teaching assistant or if you're working towards some type of deadline, you got to get that stuff done, which is really, that can really drag you down and cause burnout because usually you're on a limited time schedule, right? But when those deadlines pass, take breaks. You got to do whatever that is for you, and every person's different, right? Somebody might get that reprieve that they need just by going for a walk or, just reading a book or watching a movie or a TV show, listening to music, whatever it is that works, but you have to make sure to schedule time for it. And I say this because it works for me and it's what I tell my students, but I also recognize that not all advisors and PIs are the same. So there needs to be some sort of discussion and kind of laying out, like, if you want me to be productive and to get my job done in here, I cannot work 24/7. I have to have these breaks. And does that work for you? If it doesn't work for them, well, hopefully you've had this conversation in your first or second year and can be like, I wonder if this relationship is going to work. Because to me, that would be like a red flag. If that time that is necessary for physical and mental well-being is not given to you, that doesn't sound like a good relationship to me.
Yeah, I think as I've gotten a little further along, because I definitely understand deadlines and having to work some really long days, but I kind of started looking at it as if I don't pick a day to rest, my body's going to do it for me. And I ran into a lot of issues early on where I would push past knowing that my body was done, and it would just get worse and it would take longer to recover from it. And now it's just one of those, well, if I don't take this break now, I'm not going to be able to put my full cognitive effort into what I'm doing. I just have to walk away for a little bit and let my brain breathe. And then I can come back to things with a fresh pair of eyes. And it tends to help.
Yeah, sometimes like when I was writing dissertation and other things, especially my dissertation, I'd be like, I'm going to go play solitaire because I cannot figure out the sentence. And then you're kind of letting things like percolate in the back of your mind. And meanwhile, someone's walking in my office and my back is to them and they could totally see him playing solitaire. But it's like, no, I need this mental break. Like, this is why I'm doing that. And I think what you just described, Sarah, I think is something that you could present to any potential employer of like, if I cannot have these breaks, it will actually be to your detriment.
Yeah.
Because I will not be able to meet those deadlines and meet those things that you're hoping I can get done, because if I don't have these regularly scheduled, I'm going to be out for 2 weeks. Which would you prefer?
Yeah. I was going to say, I actually ran into that issue. I hardcore was like doing way too much the past 2 semesters, to the point where like I ended up getting sick 3 times and was in like urgent care multiple times. And I was like taking like, I think almost a month worth of like time off, just because I was so sick and just like, my body couldn't cope with everything. So
sorry.
It was rough, but it was like, I think a good learning experience to be like, I kind of know my physical and mental limits at this point, and I know when not to push past them, which is unfortunate that I had to learn that way, but at least I know now.
Yeah, now the challenge is, okay, let's not do that again. Like I found myself right now, I'm in a position where I've taken on too much. And I recognize that. So I'm like, why? I knew this was too much. Why did I do this? So now I'm just trying to backpedal and getting out of the things that I don't necessarily have to do right this moment, and just declining those things and stepping back, or like doing a bare minimum, like these manuscripts I was requested to review. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do 2 this month and then I'm done. I'm not going to do any for the rest of the summer, because doing these 2 is actually not a smart choice. I shouldn't have chosen to do that, but here we are. But at least I'll say now I'm not going to do any more until fall starts.
Yeah. I think it's just common for people who go into grad school to be the type who are going to push themselves a little bit too hard at times, because that's why we're here in the first place.
Yeah. And I guess like we're all learning to multitask too, which is like, I think graduate schools, well, I guess anytime you're kind of multitasking courses, right? When you're in high school, when you're in college, you need to multitask, like, okay, I need to study for this class, I got these homeworks. But once you go to pick up other things, now you're involved in extracurriculars, now you're doing research, and now you're doing this and that and that. Now you're multitasking all of that. Yeah. For me, like, it seems like there's even more at graduate school, because you got your classes, whatever you're teaching or what your job is, your research, and anything extra that you're tacking onto it. So that's like 3 or 4 things right there, which each have their own little subcomponents that you're multitasking as well. And then if you stay in academics, not including, say, that postdoc phase, that's more multitasking. And you have to start to learn how to balance that and be good at it pretty early on. Know what your limits are to help, because it's just there's so many balls in the air at all times. It's kind of bonkers.
Yeah.
Speaking of, would you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a professor here at A&M and staying in academia?
Luck. It's so lucky. So I guess the trajectory was similar, although I was not ready for graduate school right away. I took a year off because I wasn't prepared to apply for graduate school or anything else like that. So once I took my year off, I think 5.5 years for my Ph.D. Then I did like a 3-year postdoc. And again, luck for all of that to fall into place just there. And then luck in terms of job interviews and getting offers. So I chose to come to A&M. I started here in 2009. So I've been here 15 years now, which is a long time. And that's pretty much the trajectory. I've gone through the ranks now. I was promoted to full professor, and it was official this past September.
Congratulations.
So yeah, now it's like, okay, what am I going to get asked to do next? Now that I'm a full professor and I don't necessarily need to concentrate on my research program so much, are there other things that I could be doing for my department, for the college, for the university? And right now I'm still thriving in research, and I'll be limiting my service at least for a little while. Is that it? Is there more that I could expand on, you think, Sarah, about my trajectory?
Well, I mean, you said you took a postdoc position. Could you tell us a little bit about there, and then what led you, while you were doing a postdoc position, to think, I would like to go into academia and become a professor?
Yeah, I think becoming a professor and wanting to do that might have solidified kind of early, because I started doing undergraduate research and I was like, I love this. And then In graduate school, I was able to continue more of that and get to teach and see all those components of things, see what my advisor was doing. I was like, I really like this. For my postdoc, that was something that was piecemeal together. I didn't have a grant right away, so somebody had some extra startup funding. We kind of put that together and then wrote some grants and was able to fund like an additional 2 years. And that whole time, I was always aiming towards academics. So I was really doing the thing that I probably advise people not to do anymore, where I was like, academics. And that's a hard thing to get into because there is so much luck. You never really know what any search committee or department is even looking for when you're applying for those jobs and if you'll be a good fit or not. So it's really demoralizing sometimes to be on that job market. And I did not have a backup plan. Now I don't know what I would do if I were to leave academics, but I'm sure I would find something. It would probably be like way outside of academics and maybe just working at a bookstore, and I'd probably be pretty happy.
So when you get new students in, then do you support your students who want to go into industry in a different way than the students who want to go into academia?
I support them the best that I can. So I support whatever their career and life choices are to the best of my ability. And sometimes that means that I personally can't help them. Since I've never worked in industry, if I have some of those students, I'm like, okay, let's see if we can find you some opportunities to help you get into that field. And lots of times the students have been great. Those that don't stay in academics, they find their path, but they also know that they have my support when they're doing that. Just because I don't know everything, and I tell them I don't know everything, but that I'll do the best that I can to support them to meet those career goals.
I think that's very helpful to have.
Yeah.
I wish that we had more training, for those types of careers that are outside of academics. But there's so many, right? So how do you service everybody in, say, like a course or an internship? And you can't. It's hard.
And I mean, I think even when I came into grad school, my overall goals were probably the same, but they change so much as you're going through graduate school, where you come across something that you really thought you were going to like, and you just go, nope, I don't want to do that again. I'm going to stay away from that. And I think that also might be part of it is I was never the type of person who just knew right away, this is what I want to do. I can't not leave all the options open because especially going through the program, you meet so many people who have gotten a STEM degree and they might be doing something that's completely unrelated to what they were studying. But the particular training that they got during the PhD is what sets them up to be good in that position.
Yep. That's why I tell a lot of my students, like, our grad program is a little bit loose here in my department, and that there's not really a set classes that folks are supposed to take. So I'm like, take classes that you think might be helpful for your research, but also take classes that you think might be helpful for that future career. So folks that like to, understand mammal distributions, I'm like, go ahead, get that GIS certificate. Like, this could be really helpful for you later. Yes, it means extra classes. Just don't add them to your degree plan, but go ahead and take them and it'll be fine. So that they're kind of setting up different paths that they could potentially go on, especially because I think it's totally normal for your interests to grow and evolve while you are, growing and evolving as a person. Like, it's okay for folks to change their mind or to find something that's like new and shiny and be like, yes, that, and go in that direction.
Yeah, I switched. I started in virology in my undergrad and then started out in neuroscience when I first got here and then moved over to psychiatry and finally found my place there and just said, no, this is where I actually belong, I think, because I couldn't decide. I just knew I wanted to work with genetics, but I couldn't narrow down what kind of genetics I wanted to look into.
But you were figuring out the stuff that you didn't like along the way. Yeah, and that's super important too.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think figuring out what you don't want to do, it can be sometimes just as important as figuring out what you do want to do.
Yep, absolutely.
I guess, is there any other advice that you would give grad students, or like whether they're in your lab or just like, just general advice for grad students?
For further research, for graduate school, for postgraduate school?
If you were to go back and meet yourself as a PhD student, what do you think that you needed to hear the most?
That's a really good question.
That is a really good question. It's probably that thing that we always hear, right? Is like, it's okay to say no, and you don't need to please everybody with the requests that they have of you. You can feel bad about it when you do tell them no. I got a request the other day, which was effectively doing somebody a favor, and it was coming in at the end of the semester, and I was like, no. It's like, I'm really sorry. I wish I could help you with this. I like you, but I can't. I'm really sorry. Like, you have to go and try to solve this one on your own. I think if I had heard that as a graduate student, I feel like I'm still pretty good at saying no to most things, but I do fall into those traps of not doing it, of that continual reminder of like, you don't have to say yes to everything. It's okay to say no. You don't have to please everybody. And the advice I usually give a lot of people now is like, if you're worried about saying no, like right away, just tell them like, give me a day or two to think about it. Then tell them no. And that's totally fine. But at least it seems like that, you're seriously considering it while in the back of your head, you're screaming no. Yeah. But you want to make it seem like you're taking this request seriously. Yeah. Asking for time to think about it, I think, is always acceptable.
I think one of the things that I personally struggle with when it comes to saying no is like weighing whether or not doing the thing will actually benefit me in the long run, which sounds kind of selfish, but it is true, right? Because a lot of the opportunities that you might have to say no to may be things that might help you. And I feel like trying to tease apart whether or not it would actually be beneficial is really hard.
Sometimes too, it's a timing thing, right? Yeah. So there's some things that I'm doing that I'm saying no to right now that I would still like to do, but I need to take like 2 or 3 years off because I just don't have the time for it right now. So when those requests come through, and I'm serious, like I think this could be really beneficial, depending on where the request comes from. Like if it was within my department, I could be like, yes, I want to do this, but if you want me to do this, I need you to take this away and this away. Or I need you to give me this and this so that I have the time for it. So if you have an opportunity to negotiate. I guess that's another good piece of advice that I wish I had as a graduate student. See if you can negotiate something. If it's a timing thing and there's not an avenue for negotiation, keep a relationship with that person that asked or that entity that asked. It's like, I can't do it for the next 6 months. I am absolutely overloaded. But can you ask me again? Please, because I would love to do this. I just can't do it now. And then hopefully they'll take you up on that.
That's a good point.
I think part of my issue was always I want to take as many of the opportunities that are afforded to me as possible. And I feel like if I say no to them, they're not going to come back around and I'm just going to miss it entirely.
Yeah, that's fair.
Is that a normal way to feel? Or
I think so. Yeah. And I'm trying to maybe there's different ways though that you could be involved without the way that was requested of you. So perhaps you can have that conversation with those opportunities that are coming your way. It's like, okay, yes, I really want to be involved with this. However, I could only give it 2 hours a week. How can I fit in? How can I help if that's the time that I can give? So maybe that's a good way of assessing those situations is if you could do it, how much time reasonably could you give to it a week and then present it? And, hopefully they'll be like, okay, yes, let's get you in here and do this. Especially if you're really worried that the opportunity may not come around again. It's just can I get in there for just a little bit?
And just get your foot in the door. That's useful.
I don't know if it'll work or not. I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask, right?
It's an avenue to try that I haven't been able to try yet. So
the worst thing that they could say is, no, thank you. And you'd be like, well, shucks, and hopefully it wasn't a life-altering decision.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. You teach mammalogy?
Yes.
And any other classes?
I used to also teach an intro-level course of natural history of terrestrial vertebrates. Okay. But now I teach mammalogy every single semester. I also used to teach a grad paper reading class. Okay. But I haven't taught that. Gosh, I feel like the last time I taught it was sometime during the pandemic.
Okay. What is your favorite part of mammalogy to teach?
I think my favorite part is not going to answer your question quite the right way, but I like changing the class.
Oh, interesting.
So I know this is really not a smart choice on my part because this is one of these things that just takes a lot of time, but I do like trying to meet the learning outcomes for the students. Okay. And in what ways can I best serve them with this particular knowledge that I'm trying to give them? Okay. So I love lecturing about particular topics. I go to town on endocrinology. I think it's just like fascinating. I get 3 lectures on it. I'm sure the students are like, no more reproduction. I'm like, no, we got to talk about hormones. Let's talk about hormones. And I think like it's a bit much for them, but I really like it. And I really like talking about any adaptation stuff, but and right now as I'm trying to work out the more applied aspects of the course, how can I give these students something that they can actually use? Like they're not going to necessarily use stuff about bat echolocation later in life. They're not necessarily even going to use the things that we do in lab. And we have specimen-based labs where we're identifying things to order. I'm like, you're never going to come across a Hyrax. I mean, maybe you will. But I try to work on the skills and the different assessments that we have that can give them skills to hopefully help them later.
Yeah.
And I fail a lot. There's one assignment I was talking with my TAs about, like the purpose of this was to help them learn the material so that they're better prepared for the exam. Is that what it has turned out to be, or is it busy work? And without like hesitation, both the TAs were like, busy work. And I was like, all right, cut this one out. This isn't worth the time or anyone's effort to do it because that wasn't the intent of it.
That's pretty cool to hear, especially for any listeners who are not familiar. A lot of taxonomy-based courses, such as Mammology, typically they're very heavy on taxonomy to the point where, like, back when I took it at University of Illinois, I had to learn every scientific name, distribution, ecology, like behavior of all native species to Illinois. And then I also had to learn every order, every family of like all the mammals. And it was a lot. And it was very helpful given that I identify as a mammologist and I do comparative genomics of mammals, but like for anyone else in that class, especially people who are like studying birds or fish, they did not care. It was not that helpful to them. So it is pretty cool to hear that the course itself is more tailored to the students and what they kind of need out of it, not necessarily just like, here's a bunch of scientific names, memorize them.
Yeah, I've definitely moved away from that level of memorization.
Yeah.
Like that's how I started. Like this is definitely, you need to know what this is. You need to be able to look at it. And from looking at it, you should know this, 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 and this about it.
Yeah.
There's still some of that. But we try to help along the way because truthfully, if I were in the field doing research right now and I was like, what's this mammal? Guess what I have with me? A book, So like, if I'm doing this in the field, why should I make my students do that?
Yeah.
Trying to find these fine lines and also the time that we have available. A semester's 15, 16 weeks. That seems like a long time, but you're balancing this with the other classes that the students are taking. You're trying to make sure that it's reasonable. Like I don't want to ask for 2,000 points worth of assessments for a 3-credit course. So I got to just find the best fits at that time. So this will change in 10 years, what I have them doing and trying to give them some skills that could be useful later. Like these skills may no longer be useful in 5 years, or I might have like come up with an assignment and it was a total flop and I got to go back and rework it. So I enjoy doing that part of it, even though it takes more time.
Were you teaching this during COVID?
Yeah, so we had to come up, basically we somehow went away from specimen-based labs. I think we were like maybe showing pictures of things and doing things that way, but we came up with a lot of assignments that were mammal-based. But we use the collections when we teach. I think there's a lot of utility in students seeing biodiversity over the world. So even though it's a lot of work to pull these specimens out to show the students and hope that they have the appreciation for the biodiversity, they don't always. But I still feel like at this moment in time, the effort's still worth it. And I want to keep using these specimens in a teaching manner and hope that another COVID doesn't hit. But if it does, there was a community that formed of like, how can we still do Mammology Lab if we can't actually meet in person? So there's now a wealth of resources available to help with that.
Well, it's good that something good came out of
a lot of good things came out of it, as much as like we tend to block it out. But there are a lot of great advances in terms of pedagogy and research too, that everyone kind of jumped on while they were, after you spend like 2 months going, what am I going to do? Then you got to figure it out and kind of make it work.
Yeah. Are there any questions you want us to ask?
That I want you to ask. Okay, so the audience it's for the genetics graduate students mostly, and anyone else that's listening?
We actually just got an influx recently over the last few months. We're starting to get more postdocs, graduate, undergrad, and researchers from other universities as well. So, yeah, it's really just the research community and anyone who's interested in maybe going to grad school.
Okay. Yeah, do we want to ask questions about like grantsmanship, publications, things to help like...
Oh, actually, I do have a question on that vein.
Yeah.
So obviously, every PI is different in what they push their students very heavily towards. Some is publications, some is extra certifications, or teaching. It just kind of depends. Is there something particularly that you look at as, oh, my student's making good progress because they're putting this out into the world?
So in this case, I liken it to what we're looked at in terms of tenure promotion and like annual reviews, is that it's a big picture thing. And that progress does not need to be on a particular trajectory and that same trajectory at all times. It can go up and down. And I think that's totally normal, especially because I exhibit that myself. So my publication record is definitely like peaks and valleys, like all the time. And I'm okay with it. That's just how it works for me. And I expect the same for my students. So if we can look over a course of a year and see forward progress of some sort, even if that year was really bad for whatever reason, then we're going in the right direction, even if there's a bunch of those valleys along the way. I really try to focus individually on what the students need or want. So we always end up circling back around. It's like, what do you want to do after this degree? Like, we can do what you need to do to meet the obligations of the degree, to do as well as you can with the research, but what do you want to do next? And you should always be thinking about that and trying to gain those skills to help you do what it is that you want to do next. And sometimes that's getting involved with additional research. Sometimes that's classes and certification. Sometimes it's more teaching, whatever it is that that person thinks would help them.
That's very helpful.
I do... For a lot of them, I push them all towards, we want to publish what you're working on at some point. So we need to make sure that this research project that you're working on is rigorous and thorough. Yeah. So let's do the best that we can. Also, you should be an expert in this when it's all said and done. So you need to be reading the literature. Even if you're never going to work on this group again, this is your project. It should be your baby. You should know everything about it. I lost my train of thought there for a second, and it's probably gone. I think it's gone. And along with that is we want to publish the research, but also trying to teach the skills and grantsmanship of like, every one of my students should at least apply for one grant while they're in graduate school, just to get a feeling of what that is like. And trying to teach them the benefits of like reusing your writing, but not necessarily plagiarism, right? But like, if you've written something for a grant proposal, that could be part of your dissertation. That could be part of the proposal that goes to the graduate school and professional school. Use that time that you're spending to learn about your system to apply anything that you've written to as many things as you can.
Is there anything that you can say made you realize that you finally got to the point where you were the expert on that? Because I struggle with, how am I going to know when I'm the expert on my subject? When does that point happen? Is it something you become aware of, or do you just gradually realize, hey, I know a lot about this?
I think you gradually realize it, but the other great thing about science being a process, right, is you never know everything. So as long as you recognize that at the same time. For me, I think it was in retrospect, and I think about my dissertation defense and how I spent like forever talking about these methods that were so interesting to me, but so boring to everybody else. I was like, oh, well, I'm clearly an expert in this because I put half the room to sleep, and I should never, ever give a talk like that again. And that's when I realized, like, I'm really, like, at that time, I knew that stuff like hands down, and I wanted to tell everyone about it, and I should have been advised to dial it back. But that's when I knew. I was like, yes, I know that thing pretty well. And and I still am very open to, like, even though I know this particular assemblage pretty well, there's many things that I don't know about it. So as long as I'm open to learning more, then I think that makes anybody like an expert in that field, because they're continually willing to learn about it.
I agree. I think it's a continual learning process. I just don't ever feel like I'll ever know enough about what I'm studying.
You'll never know everything, but I think that's okay. Mm-hmm. So as long as you get to that point where it's like, okay, if I don't know everything, then you're in a good place.
Yeah, if you can recognize that you don't know everything, I feel like you're in a good spot, right? Because you know what you don't know. So I guess one of the questions that I wanted to ask is that, like, as a PI, as a mentor, as a scientist, what do you want your, like, legacy to be?
I don't want a legacy.
At all?
No, I don't care. I mean, like, I think when folks go into this wanting a legacy, that causes problems.
For sure.
Yeah. I think I would like to contribute knowledge. Yeah. And if that's my legacy, great. If I've impacted some people's lives, even better.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely not coming at it of like, I want to be the, like with this mouse system, like I want to be the one that revises the whole taxonomy and that's going to be my legacy. No, I think people would hate me with that one. So, I think contributing knowledge, impacting some lives, that sounds great to me without killing myself while I'm doing it.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's another thing that comes up with that like balance and not overworking is like recognizing I like this job a lot. I want to keep this job, but I'm not willing to work until 3 a.m. for it. I'm not willing to lose all my weekends. Do I still like work in off hours? Yes. I have a whole cohort of students who will be like, that email that you sent at 5 a.m. I was like, yeah, I keep forgetting to save to draft so that you won't make that comment about what time I sent it. But I'll often stop at like 4 in the afternoon because I'm doing things with my family.
Yeah.
So my schedule shifted and I try not to shame anyone for having an outside of the 8 to 5 schedule.
Yeah.
Like that's fine. People work differently in different hours and that's all okay. And please stop making fun of me because of my timestamp. It is what it is. There was whole conversations about this in the past and I'm kind of like, whatever. Like I could try to save everything to drafts and send it at 8 a.m., but I don't care. I'm sending it.
Yeah.
I just want it off my plate.
Yeah.
That's exactly the way I am. And I had that talk with my PI where I just asked, sometimes it's best for me to do a chunk of work in the morning and then walk away for a couple hours and then come back to it in the afternoon. And so sometimes if I send an email at 1 or 2 a.m., is that okay? I'm like, obviously, I don't expect you to look at it or even be awake. She's like, oh, no, that's fine. When you're done and you want to send it, just send it. And I'll get to it when I get to it. Yeah. And so that made me feel a lot better because I was sitting here going, oh no, if I send these emails at 2 a.m., she's going to think that I wasn't working during the day and I was only doing it in the middle of the night, last minute. And so after I had that conversation with her, it made me feel a lot better.
Oh, good.
But I'm the same way. I just send it at the most random times whenever I'm done.
And I tell my students the same thing. I was like, just because you get an email from me at like 6 or 7 a.m. does not mean that I expect you to be working at that time.
Yeah.
This is just what works best for me. This is when I'm able to fire off some things. So this is when I do it. I remember my postdoc advisor, he would always like check his email in the evenings. So I would get these like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. emails from him, but that's because that's when he was dealing with that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was fine. There was something else I was going to say relative to that. For my students that do work different schedules, I do always try to advise them. I was like, come in for half the day. That way you're interacting with your colleagues and your peers, and maybe that half of the day is in the afternoon because you're a night owl and that's what works best for you, then great. Don't force yourself to maybe get run down and overdoing it by thinking you have to be here at 8 a.m. You don't. But you do, and you probably should be here in person at least several days a week during regular business hours because there's a lot of potential missed opportunities if you're not around.
Yeah. No, I agree with that entirely. And I mean, it still works the same for me, just being a night owl. My brain works better after 6 p.m. for some reason. And so I get a large chunk of my work done from like 6 to 10 p.m. every day.
I think that's fine. I'm a morning person. Like you will get like stupid emails from me from 6 to 10 p.m. I'm not even awake that late. So, but if I'm sending anything out, it's like a 1-word answer from my phone. Like I'm definitely not working.
All right. Do you have any more questions?
I think that's it If I come up with any more questions, I'll definitely email you.
Yeah, please. Yeah, I'm happy to provide advice whenever I can because I know that stuff, it's just not out there. I know there are books that people have written about like navigating graduate school and all that other stuff, but sometimes it's just easier to talk to somebody, especially for things like this. Sometimes there are cases where you want to do some homework first and then talk to somebody, but that's usually going to be applied to, what you're working on and trying to problem solve some things. But sometimes just talking to people is really helpful and hopefully can get you or anyone moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just really bad advice and you can just be like, okay, well, that's not going to work for me. But at least it's something you can cross off of knowing that that's not going to work.
Yeah. And I feel like this podcast has been really useful because while the answers are not the same by any means, there's a similar theme to a lot of things, imposter syndrome and boundaries and things like that, that everyone says, those are just things you have to learn while you're going through graduate school. You don't know what those are when you start, and you'll just get to a point where you say, no, this is not conducive.
And I would say it goes past graduate school too, though. Like I learned a whole bunch as a postdoc in terms of like how, like knowing that I wanted to go into academics, like I used that opportunity to be like, how do I want things to be? And also like changing that. Like when I was in graduate school, there was a program nearby where it was a really family oriented type of graduate program, and I loved it and I thought it was great. And I wish that I could replicate that. And then as I ended up, having a family and all this stuff, I'm like, I can't replicate that. So how can I make things somewhat nice for my graduate students if I can't provide this like family level thing that I had observed when I was in graduate school? And just, willing to make changes and pivots and trying to do the best that I can for the people that I work with. And then myself too. You should always put yourself as a priority, not your advisor. Maybe they're paying you, so there's some things that you got to get done, but what you are doing is for you. So if anybody ever guilts you into like, well, but this is for so-and-so and so-and-so, I'm like, no, actually, like my research, and I'm doing it for this reason, that should always come first.
Yeah, that's a great point. I feel like your PhD is as much about scientific discovery as it is self-discovery. So,
yeah. And it keeps going too. Yeah. So don't feel like you have to figure everything out when you're in graduate school, because life is a continual learning process, right? You're going to keep learning.
I think my problem was I thought I had it figured out pretty well before I got to grad school because I am an older student. And I had done so many things before coming here that I was like, oh no, I know myself. I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing. Grad school has brought out parts of me that I am just now becoming aware of. It's such a unique experience. I think.
Really is. And it's going to be unique to everyone's experience will be different. And that's why it's important not to compare yourself to other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Today's episode was hosted by Emmarie Alexander and Sarah Ingram and produced by Aaron DeSalvio. This podcast is brought to you by the Texas A&M University Interdisciplinary Graduate Program in Genetics and Genomics. If you have any questions about our program here at A&M, please feel free to email us at bluejeansandboots@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Genetics Podcast. Thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll tune in next time.